A very good evening and welcome to this edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko. The Watchdog starts right now.
We are procuring emergency supply. And here is it is comprised of 11 suppliers, 3 of them are power ships. And if we have an issue with that, or say 20 years is too long, it cannot be 20 years long for power ship, but it's good for others.
Well, everyone thought it was a done deal. A Turkish company, Karpowership, had been shortlisted as a company that was going to provide alternative energy in order to, of course, help out Eskom, who can't meet the country's electricity needs as we speak. Well, this morning, to the shock of many in government and in the industry, the Department of Environmental Affairs announced that it had rejected the application from Turkish company Karpowership for 3 ships that would be situated along South Africa's coast to provide for some of our energy needs. Nozintombi Mia takes a look at the developments that took place this morning that brought us here.
In March, the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy chose Turkish-owned company Karpowership as a preferred bidder to supply emergency electricity in a bid to deal with the country's electricity shortage issues. The company was to provide floating gas-fired power ships at 3 ports, and as a result submitted their impact assessment study to the Department of Environment for review.
We received the application. It is meant for the company to continue or to proceed with the generation of gas to energy. And of course, as part of the requirements that comes with projects of this magnitude, what you need in that process is an environment impact assessment, what is commonly called EIA. And after receipt of the application, we then also got a subsequent concern or query from another organization that claimed allegations of impropriety and other issues that were raised, and we then had to investigate those issues.
But the application was found lacking.
The application that was presented to us by Karpowership didn't sufficiently meet the requirements that we expected from a project of this magnitude. Firstly, we found that in their engagements with regards to this project, the competent authority found that there was not enough work done to make sure that we have extensive and inclusive public participation. We also have a responsibility to make sure that when we give authorization, that authorization would not be found wanting a few years down the line. When you give authorization to a company on a project that could be 20 years long, 20 years is a long time to live with your decision. So your decision must be very cogent, must be in the interest of the public, must be in the interest of the environment.
As things stand, the Turkish-based company Karpowership will not be able to continue with their development of gas-to-power project at either the Saldanha Bay, Kucha, the Nelson Mandela Bay, and Richards Bay. But they can appeal the department's ruling within the next 20 days. In their appeal, Karpowership would have to respond convincingly to the key issues that were raised by the department on the impact their operations will have on the community, the environment, and the marine life. In a statement, Karpowership lashed out at the department, claiming their decision was misinformed. They maintain that they met all the necessary requirements and will appeal the Environment Department's decision. Environmental groups filed complaints about the company's plans, while the losing bidder, DNG Energy, brought a court application against the plans.
One of the big ones is the fact that actually the ships, in order to cool themselves, would have to take in a lot of water and push that back into the harbor, which would warm the water, affecting local fisheries. And that's part of the reason why fishermen and communities in these areas have been resisting these power ship programs. Additionally, through burning gas, they would create air pollution as well as contribute to climate change.
Energy experts have echoed the sentiments by environmental lobby groups and say the tender process for the power ships were deeply flawed.
The Karpowership program has been estimated to cost South Africa over 200 billion in the space of 2 decades. And according to many energy analysts, the procurement process that created the Karpowership program was one that was deeply rigged and deeply flawed to favor these expensive, polluting, and what many argue is arguably corrupt tenders.
The Department of Mineral Resources and Energy has noted the decision taken and said they would wait for formal communication by Karpowership before making any further pronouncements. Nozindombi Mia, SABC News, Gauteng.
Well, to say some very powerful people within government are angry would be an understatement. As we speak, people, it's a frenzy. Officials that were supposed to come on the program could no longer come. They had to cancel at the very last minute. And all really we deserve as South Africans is, what went wrong? And what are the implications for the country's security of electricity supply? Because this particular project was touted as something that would go a long way to ensuring that we mitigate the rolling blackouts that we have seen. Notwithstanding, of course, the flaws and some of the things that happened up to this point. To discuss this, we are now joined by Professor Haro von Blotnitz, who is a director of the Energy System Research Group based at the University of Cape Town, as well as Amapungane Journalism Sam Soul, who has written extensively on this particular issue, and in particular the bid by Karpowership. Good evening to both of you, gentlemen, and thank you so much for coming through at the last minute. I must point out, we really appreciate. I'm going to start with you, Sam. Amapungane have been on this story for quite a while now. Just very briefly take us through some of the things that you have discovered that either didn't make sense or left a lot of question marks.
Look, I think the main thing is the setup of the whole tender. The terms and conditions that were set out in the RFP were appropriate to an emergency short-term solution. They were basically about emergency solutions at Eskom's highest level of demand for that period. And they required that each supplier at each site fulfill very stringent requirements. That may have been made sense for a short-term project, 3-5 years, while Eskom built its other capacity. But the fact that this project went out for 20 years really then raised key questions for us about what's going on here, because the two pressures did not make sense. The one, for 20 years, you would want to have flexibility, you would want to really bring in renewables, etc. But the way it was set up was skewed in a way towards this Karpowership solution. And that might have made sense for a short-term project. It didn't make sense for 20 years. So that's why we started having a very close look at this.
And you didn't think that perhaps it was an acknowledgement or let's say, that, Eskom is far from really being able to satisfy our energy needs. So give whoever has to come in, a much longer period so that you don't have to go through processes of renewing this every, say, 5 or 10 years.
Look, the professor's probably got a much more detailed answer than I. But, I mean, Eskom does have a long-term generation supply plan, a proper mix, etc., whereas this did not fit in with those requirements and parameters for the next 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Prof, what do you think could have been the reason for the kind of deal that Sam has just described, instead of one that could have easily gone for been for what, 5 years, and then take it from there afterwards.
Yeah, that did surprise everyone that it came out for a 20-year deal when it was an emergency program, especially where the plant is mobile. It can be brought into our harbour and it can be taken away when the build plan materialises. In 2019, we got the integrated resource plan by the department, which foresees a build plan of a mix of generation up to 2030. And yes, that acknowledged that we are short of supply in the right now immediately. We knew that, of course, through the load shedding. And that gap needed to be filled, but that gap needed to be filled for just a couple of years until the build plan kicks in and delivers. And so for something to then suddenly come out with a 20-year time plan where the integrated resource plan was foreseeing other things was indeed surprising.
Now, Sam, the 20-year factor was not the only one you guys uncovered. You also uncovered that the Director General and the Deputy Director General in the department met with one of the bidders at a restaurant in Pretoria somewhere, something that of course caught a lot of attention. Take us through that.
Yes, no, look, this was something uncovered by, I mean, we reported on it first, but it was something that involved one of the bidders who was competing against Karpowership. He was called to a meeting on his version at this restaurant in Pretoria. He found the Director General there and another senior official. And according to him, they sketched out a demand that he play ball, that nothing happens and these sorts of contracts are not granted in this country unless you're part of a system. And either you get with the system or you're not going to be successful. The DG and his senior official partner have a different version, which the department has put to court. But frankly, it doesn't add up. Officials at that level know that they don't hold meetings with bidders outside of the formal processes, outside of the office, in informal settings like this. You know, if they were ambushed, they didn't say that they were ambushed. They should have got up and walked out straight away. Even on their version, that's not what happened. So that raises a lot of questions, although it didn't involve Karpowership. Was it involved another bidder? But it raised a lot of questions about the bona fides of this process, the bona fides of people in the department, and of the deal itself.
A question I put to Minister Gwede Mantashe when he was my guest over a week ago, and I hope we'll be able to play that clip, when I asked him, you know, about this very same question. Listen to a part of his reply.
If there's impropriety on their part, they must be found guilty and action will be taken against them.
Have you ever asked them what they were doing there?
No, wait. The problem for you think that when there is something called an affidavit, is a conversation. When there's an affidavit, it's not a conversation. It's a court process, and people will have to go and answer in full in court, be found guilty there or not guilty. Now, if you try to preempt that process, you are going to be in trouble. One of the issues that I raised with everybody in the department, I said, listen, guys, the state took trouble to build us offices. Why should we meet in cafes and restaurants instead of meeting in the office? But we can't say you don't talk to people in a department that is like ours. Talk to people. But people must come to the office of the department to assert the authority of the state.
Sam Soul, your thoughts? You had that answer.
Well, he's essentially agreeing with me that there are real questions about why those officials were meeting with people at a restaurant. I think he's he's wrong when he says this matter will be dealt with via the court process. The interests of a bidder and the information available to a particular bidder to support his case is not the same as the duties that the minister has to ensure that he runs a clean department and that his officials are accountable for what they do in a process that is going to cost the country 200 billion over 20 years. That is his business, and it's not to be left just to court processes that is oblique to that question.
Which is a point I made to him that day, that he needs to be able or to be in a position to vouch for the integrity of whatever process his department undertakes.
Correct.
Prof, the Environmental Department's refusal to give authorization or a permit to Karpowership is based on two things in the main. One, the inadequacy of environmental impact assessment, and the second one is the inadequacy of the public consultation process.
Indeed, that's what the statement said. The public participation in environmental impact assessments is very, very important in our regulations. It speaks directly to the history of our country, where environmental injustice was served on the oppressed. It is so important that any environmental impact assessment process in this country that does not meet a minimum standard of public participation will automatically be thrown out. No matter what the merit of the actual matter is, this process has to be run properly.
Why are these two things important, Prof? Why is it important to have an environmental impact assessment? Why is it important to consult, before anything? Because these are things that get taken for granted. And I mean, in the decades one has had to, report often people who undertake these big billions of rands worth of projects tend to, classify or think of these two things as unnecessary and, things that just, block processes, stand in the way of work that has to be done.
Yeah, and maybe people who have that view should just study our history of environmental impact assessment carefully to know just how powerful it is. This is not the first time very powerful people are very upset about a decision. The Pebble Bed nuclear reactor essentially also ended around an environmental impact assessment. That time around it was slightly different. The department granted it, and it fell to a court to overrule the department that indeed the public participation process had been tokenism and really hadn't listened to the public. At that time, I believe President Mbeki was highly upset about the EIA regulation, how it had been used. But it is there to give effect to a clause in the Bill of Rights, which says that all of us, everyone who lives in this country, has the right to a healthy environment, to have the environment protected for the benefit of future generations. And when we generate electricity at this scale over 20 years, with a fossil fuel, there are going to be sizable impacts. When we put these huge machines in a harbour, in a working harbour, there will be obstruction of other operations for which this harbour was built. There will be noise that will affect the residents, and there will be impacts on marine life. And so it has to be studied, it has to be considered. You can't take it for granted.
And Prof, knowing what you know about the capacity of South Africans, the renewables players, and if indeed these Karpowership projects were to fall flat, do you think that it would be a problem, or even more of a problem, for us going into the future? In other words, this is going to throw a spanner in the works.
Yeah, look, until a week ago, if this had happened before what the president said a week ago, we would be really worried that load shedding is going to get much worse. Fortunately, it's just a week ago that the president announced the lifting of the cap on embedded generation up to 100 megawatt. And the estimates are that there's 5,000 megawatt of possible projects which desperate private sector users who need electricity and who can generate it cheaper than they can buy it will be building, and they'll be building it at speed. So I'm not too worried actually with today's decision condemning us to more load shedding.
Mm-hmm. Sam, have we had the last, I know that the matter is still going to come before courts, but have we had the last about allegations of corruption and meddling around this whole deal?
No, I think not. Look, despite the fact that Karpowership is now on the back foot, we think that there was a lot of smoke generated around this decision and this deal, even if Karpowership is completely innocent, an innocent party. And we're going to be digging at those relationships that, there are indications of, there have been further allegations made by the disgruntled bidder. He still has to have his final say, and we have to see what happens in court. So I don't think the story is over.
Okay, that's where we're going to leave it for this evening. Thanks to both of you, gentlemen. Sam Soul from Investigative Journalism Unit, Amapungana, as well as Professor Haro von Blotnitz, who is from the University of Cape Town. Well, we did ask for officials to come and explain what this all means, what went wrong, and where and what may happen next. But at the last minute, they pulled out of the interview. But we will be back tomorrow with more. You're watching The Watchdog. Do join us again tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock. Have a good night.